everybody, and welcome. This is Dave Opton speaking, and wherever you're joining us from, both Harriet and I are delighted that you've taken some time from your day or evening to join us on today's call. And we're gonna get into this in very short order. I just want to take a moment or two here at the beginning, particularly for those of you who are new to the call and haven't been on one before, and just to let you know kind of what the format is and how things work. First of all, this is essentially kind of like a conference call, if you will. It's not a formal webinar in the sense that most of us are used to. That neither Harriet nor I have a set agenda here. We don't have formal presentations or anything like that. We're just simply here as resources to anybody on the call who has a question or a concern, anything on their mind that they would like to kind of pick our brains on. Both of us have been around the career management world long enough so that we probably, I don't know if we'll have specific answers or not, but we definitely will have opinions, and we're happy to share those with you. And so that's basically what our role here is today, is to try to be a resource and to try to help you with anything that is on your mind that you'd like to raise as an issue. And the way that you do that, if you look over to the right, you'll see an area there where you can post something. It works pretty much like an instant messaging system. You shouldn't be at all concerned about confidentiality. We don't even use first names. We'll just take the questions, as many as we can during the time that we have together, and try to, as I said, try to respond to them. So whatever's on your mind, just go ahead and put it in there. And as I said, we'll take as many as we can. Other than that, I think it works pretty much, as I said, kind of like a conference call, and that's kind of how it rolls. I will say one other thing, because we also have lots of members who attend more than one of these. So it may be during the course of the conversation that an issue is going to come up that you've heard myself or whoever else is on the call with me talk about before, but please keep in mind that it's the first time that this person is asking the question, not necessarily the first time that you've heard it. But even in those situations, you may hopefully pick up a tip or an idea or a suggestion that is valuable to you. So with that in mind, let's just fire it up. For those of you who, by the way, who have not had the opportunity to check out the background of my guest today, I am delighted that Harriette Lowenthal is with me again today. She is certainly a battle-scarred veteran in this world, I can assure you of that. And she provides guidance and developmental coaching to many of our members. She brings years of experience in the executive development and talent management world. Her experience, well, covers a lot of territory, but certainly includes organizational assessment, measurement and research, strategy development and execution, succession management process, as well as I said, executive development. Her consultation and consulting practice over the years, she has consulted with a kind of a who's who list of the Fortune 500, including such companies as Caterpillar, Hallmark, Eli Lilly, GM, McDonnell Douglas, now that we know most of us know it as Boeing, American Express, and many, many others. Her undergraduate and master's degree in psychology and counseling education comes from USC in California. And she is a busy camper for sure, but as I said, I'm delighted that she could join me today. Thanks, Harriet. I'm glad to have you here.
Thanks, Dave. My pleasure. I look forward to it.
Okay, well, let's get right into it. Now, let me start with this question that this person has posed. And the person says this, how has job search process changed in the last dozen years? I left my last position, which was a great executive spot that I actually found through ExecuNet about a dozen years ago, after a hostile takeover. I've not been truly active in the executive search process since that time because of health issues that are now behind me. So as I rejoin the marketplace, I kind of feel like Rip Van Winkle. What are today's habits and expectations that the job market expects from executives. I remember the days when we mailed resumes or faxed them. I remember when we had pagers, and now we have smartphones, etc. I'm sure that networking is still a major part of it, but I just kind of wondered what else has changed, what's hot, what's not, so that I can get a better idea of whether or not I'm approaching the whole subject in a smart way. Harriet, I know in talking with your clients and folks that you counsel with, you probably have run across any number of people who haven't been active in the market in a while and now find that it's 2015 and that a lot of things are different. What would you say to this person in terms of kind of what's changed and how one should approach it?
Thanks, Dave. Well, wow, what a great question, because the world is quite different. I think the single most influence that we've noticed and seen has certainly been that of the Internet, both in how research is done on the executive candidate side as well as how recruiters and organizations respond. Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing to just be mindful of is, while there appears to be an abundance of executive level positions, whether it be job posts on our own site or beyond, that can be misleading. Many organizations utilize that process because it's easy, it's quick, and obviously it's the contemporary way to do it. But it's often met with disappointment simply from uploading your resume or responding to a posting. What you know from your past in terms of fully utilizing your personal or professional network for introductions, connections, and so on is still very relevant today. And having an updated ExecuNet profile, a LinkedIn profile, or some other professional profile, along with the capability of building direct connections and relationships, is really the key here. That's the first point. The second point I would say is this whole notion of leveraging what you have done, but most importantly, marketing your value or potential. And that's being very clear about the value add. What will you bring to that next role or organization that's unique? And to help define that within the parameters of what you're looking for. So in essence, you're the product now, and you're really talking about your go-to-market strategy.
Makes all kinds of sense, and I certainly have found that in talking with members as well, in terms of the first of all, the trap that you mentioned, because of technology today, and there are literally millions of postings all over the place. It's very easy to sit behind a keyboard and just start firing stuff out all over the place. But I also find, and Harriet, I'm sure you do too, that the frustration factor on the part of someone active in the market rises very, very quickly, because they send this stuff out and it's kind of like dead silence is the return. And so it's very easy to say, what the heck is the matter with me? Why is the world, operating this way? And I would just sort of underscore what you're talking about, is that while it may be easy, it is certainly not the most effective route to go, for sure. I will, 70% of our members over the years, and we've been around for 27, still tell us that it was a linkage process, networking, whatever words you want to put around it, is what made it happen for them. And that is particularly true in terms of the audience that we serve here at ExecuNet. We're talking about senior level executives here. And that's how those changes get made, which is why we invest as much time and energy as we do in trying to, A, help people understand that, but B, also try to provide them with tools that will enhance that process for them. In fact, while we're there, Harriet, and since you mentioned the importance of profiles and things like that, let me just take a second here, Kim, if you would, to show the audience a couple of things here about the site, because whether you're a new member with us or whether you've been around for a while but haven't had a chance to really get into the revised site or check out your profile recently, it is really, really critical that you do this. Your profile here is the first place that a recruiter is going to come. It is the first place that other members are going to come. And that starts with making sure that it is complete, that it presents you the way you want to be presented, and that includes starting with your picture, an introduction, etc., as most of us are used to seeing on whether it's this site or others. But if you have not done that or haven't brought it up to date, as you can see, once you log in, you click on My Account, it goes down to that area, and I've highlighted a couple things there. One is your profile. You can certainly edit it there. The second has to do with resumes, where you see I've got a little arrow that talks about scheduling a review. Part of your membership here, whether you're a basic member with us or whether you're a platinum member, is you are entitled to a resume review. If you have not taken advantage of that, I would certainly urge you to do so. I think you will find it a valuable discussion, and it's kind of critical, as I said, because profiles and resumes are still the the place where people are going to start this process. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, you certainly should. So Harriet, thanks for mentioning that as well. For those of you who might have come in a few minutes late, let me just say that if you've got questions or issues that you'd like to raise, we'll be happy to try to respond to them. This is not a kind of formal presentation in that sense. This is really, you're setting the agenda. So don't be bashful. Pop it up there, and Harriet and or I will do our best to try to respond to you. Just look over there on the right, and you can put them in. Harriet, here's another question that says, what's the basic tactic to get your cover letter and or your resume noticed when you're applying to a posted position? That's a question that comes up with some fair frequency at all, because you can just kind of imagine what the volume is, particularly online. What thoughts would you have for this member on that subject?
Well, again, it goes back to the ideal is to try and get your resume in the hands of one of the decision makers, and to get around the so-called gatekeepers when possible. That being said, I should have mentioned with the previous question that sometimes we do have executives snail mail, so to speak, but overnight or directly mail a resume and cover letter to the executive if they can find the name and the address and so on of that particular organization. We do know that it does get read. Or looked at, I should say, in that particular case. In fact, funny story, I had an executive tell me that he decided to drop off his resume and cover letter once at an organization and had a very difficult time with the receptionist. Couldn't, for the life of her, figure out why he was standing in the lobby with something that he was given her, and became very suspicious about what was in the envelope. So the times have changed. But the other part of that is your resume itself. Does it stand out and stand apart? Does it really market your potential and what value you bring? Or is it, quite frankly, boring? Have you tacked onto it so many times throughout your career that it now looks like every other black and white resume that may get uploaded? And oftentimes a big mistake executives make is that they have their entire career summary on their resume, which means all of a sudden the document is 4 to 5 pages. So that, as well as what's in your cover letter. Is it intriguing? Does it have the capability of either influencing the individual to make a decision and take you to the next step, or at the very least to turn to your resume? Or again, is it so long and so irrelevant that it really just gets passed over? So knowing how to position yourself, being very clear about what your differentiators are, having that reflected in your resume and cover letter and so on, and sometimes creatively finding a different way into the organization are all ideas.
And we just somebody just posted something which is kind of like a corollary question to this. Wanted to know, how important is a cover letter in today's job search? As a hiring manager, I often discarded these and focused more on the resume. What do you think about that, Harriet?
Depends on the person and the other person sitting on the other side of the desk. I have a CEO that I've coached over the last several years in a startup situation, so there's no HR department, so to speak. He's the HR department. So when the resumes come in, he said he reads the cover letter, looks at the education, and then decides what to do with a candidate. So point being, you have no idea what process is being followed on the other side of the email or the upload or the desk, so to speak. Some individuals do read cover letters, some don't. Some glance at resumes, some read resumes very thoroughly. You have no idea. So the bottom line is this: whatever that first point of contact is, whether it's a resume, a cover letter, some other kind of document, or even your online profiles, you have to assume that you need to have that value add, clear message communicated very quickly and very succinctly, because you just don't know what process is being followed.
Yeah, I would add to that, and sort of the key operative thing here is you don't know. So you're making an educated guess. As this person says, when they were a hiring manager, they didn't bother with it. And as Harriet says, some people do, some people don't. So I guess absent any other information, my recommendation is, as always, and I happen to be a believer in cover letters, but in this day and age in particular, I am a very strong believer in particularly when you don't have any other information. And by that I mean when you're responding to a posting or something like that. I would be as brief as possible. Because this is in today's technology and in this age, attention spans have become even, almost measured in nanoseconds. So my suggestion to folks is, if you're going to use a cover letter, and I happen to believe in them, I would make it brief and very focused to sort of support what Harriet was saying in terms of, to make sure that what you're putting in there you believe is really attention-getting. I think there is a trap that a lot of us fall into when we're doing things like this, and this is true also in profiles, I've noticed, is you try to provide too much information too soon based on the assumption that everybody's going to read this. And everybody is not going to read this the first time through. They are probably going to scan it for whatever subject matter they happen to be interested in at the time. You've got plenty of time if and when you get a phone call for an interview or other situations to add meat to those bones, but I would keep it, as I said, at least initially, brief and focused. And here's another little hint, at least if you're, when you are answering a posting, and that's this. If it's well written, and a lot of them aren't, but if it is, hopefully somewhere in the context of that posting, you will see an area that talks about must-have X, Y, or Z, which is really the major pain point. The other stuff are kind of nice-to-haves, but not necessarily must-have, 10-plus years experience launching products in Latin America or whatever it might be. If you're going to respond to something like that, in a cover letter, I would focus on the must-have and move on from there. Harriet, anything you want to add to that?
I would just agree with that entirely. And even, I would certainly not recommend doing this for every single position that you have an interest in applying for. However, if you've got the connections, if it's a really good fit and something that you really are interested in pursuing, then I think Dave's recommendation I would even carry perhaps even into the beginning of your resume. Just make sure that the alignment is there on your resume as well. It may be as simple as, changing, let's say, manufacturing to read OEM or something to that effect, to make certain that it's not missed and that it's noticed. But again, to do that for every single position, usually a waste of your time. So you do need to be very strategic in making those determinations.
Yep. And while we were talking about that, this member put up and said, wondered if I could provide any further information on what I consider considers a brief cover letter. Don't take this literally, but if it were me, it would be something along the lines of in your recent posting for ABC, I noticed that it was critical to have this particular type of experience. I've done this not once but twice over the not once but twice. It's always been an area for which I have a lot of passion. Happy to discuss at your convenience. See you around the campus. I mean, that's what I mean by brief. Let's see. This person says, I'm a small business owner going back for encore job as part of downshifting. Is this possible? How is this type of candidate perceived? Harriet, I'm sure that you have talked to people who are, either been out on their own or whatever, and now are going back into a more, a more corporate type of environment where it's not their own business or something like that, and that does present, sort of conditions that aren't, that have to be overcome. What suggestions do you have for somebody facing that kind of a challenge?
Well, I just had this conversation this morning with a member. And I do have it all the time. First and foremost, you need to get your story organized. Why is it, and what is it that you're going to say about that? That's consistent, brief, and to the point. And then to Dave's earlier point, it might be that in your cover letter or some other document addressing that question head on. Why are you looking to leave, let's say, consulting or owning your own business to return to a more product-focused company? And being able to write or communicate a few sentences around that. It takes the elephant out of the room, because we all know that's the first question people are going to ask when your resume or whatever document hits their desk or their laptop is, why is this person looking? Or they may make the assumption that you're not going to stick around if they do hire you, that you're going to look back to another opportunity to have your own company. So number one is getting clear about that and what your strategy is and your rationale, and then secondarily communicating that quite openly and early on so that you don't get passed over for possibilities because assumptions are made.
Yeah. What we're talking here, and there's a big long list of these I'm sure that any one of us on this call could name, but there is a bias that exists when somebody is looking, trying to get back from a situation where they were, an owner themselves and so forth, and now back into a situation where they are going to end up working for someone else, etc. So obviously those are concerns that a potential that the candidate has to deal with in terms of trying to help who the potential employer is overcome what those concerns might be. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, but it's very difficult to do. This is a particular situation, and another reason why networking is the most effective tool that you've got. Because if that bias is going to operate, and you're responding to job postings, you're just not going to have the opportunity to help someone understand what your value proposition really is, what you are going to bring to their enterprise, things that you've done in your own situation, which would be valuable to them, and there are probably plenty of them. But if that bias is there, it's just going to, there's a delete key that's going to happen. So this is another reason why it's particularly important to expand your personal and professional network, so that as you are able to do that, people start to get to know you as a person. They begin to see the kinds of qualities that you bring as an individual, and the kinds of things that you might bring to either their enterprise or that they might want to refer you to, or some combination thereof. So I think, plenty of people, the experiences that you get out of, in this case, having owned your own business, whether it's large or small, the issues and the challenges that a business has to deal with, it's all relative. The big concern here from a bias point of view is, hey, if this person has been their own boss, how happy are they going to be working for A, someone else, B, somebody who might be considerably younger than they are, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, and the idea here is to try to put yourself into a position where people can, if they get to know you as an individual, can see that those kinds of things that might have been a concern don't come across at all. Let's see here. On the topic of differentiators, being that we're all executives, what are the items that would separate you from others? The other day I heard being adaptable. I expect that everyone in our space is adaptable. Can you either of you offer any insight as to what would be a good differentiator? Harriet?
That's a great question too. It depends on the individual. I'm smiling because of the word adaptable, and results focused or oriented popped into my head as well. This needs to be about you. Your differentiators are your differentiators. And number one, it's taking that step back and figuring out what that is. In the days when I was doing a lot of executive assessment, we talked about sort of a three-legged stool, if you will. And I like to say, if you think of that stool, and on top of that stool, you're going to build your go-to-market strategy, your branding, your positioning, and so on. We need to make sure that we're including elements of what you've done. So obviously your experience, but not just the facts, but what's unique about your experience that would help you stand out and stand apart from others, given your target market or where you want to land. So what you've done, what you know, and it goes beyond degrees. Obviously that's a given in certain situations, but what other kinds of experiences have you had both personally and professionally that would translate again to your ability to come in and add value? And then most importantly, and I think this really hits your question, who you are. And those differentiators are going to be about you. Yes, adaptability is important, but just saying that word is only one part of that. Why are you adaptable? How did you become to be so adaptable? If I think about a member, Tim, that I was involved with helping with his strategy and such, the reason Tim learned to be so adaptable is because Tim happened to be the youngest of 8 kids. And so he said, I was always negotiating something or either that or trying to get my voice heard. So in Tim's words at the time, he said, so I learned how to use either a dictatorial or a democratic approach. And I said, well, Tim, we may not want to use that exactly like that, but we were able to then talk about situational leadership and how he learned to kind of change and sort of adapt to different situations and so on. And that became a part of his story. So it's beyond just saying I'm adaptable. It's being able to describe that and back it up and understand why that's unique for you and how that's unique for you, and then be able to tell that story in the search process.
Great. Thanks, Harriet. Let me see. This says, from time to time, LinkedIn issues a list of overused words that professionals use in their resumes and profiles while seeking a consulting work or a job. Does this argument have credence from your perspective? What do you think about that?
Yes, in fact, when I said results-oriented, I was thinking of the LinkedIn, I call it the top 10 list. I'm not sure if it's 10.
Yeah.
But, yes, absolutely. There does come a point where you have to balance the two. Some of it is relevant because it does, they are key words that are looked for in the search process or in the screening process. And yet at the same time, they can be so overutilized that they become meaningless. So I think, again, you may use some of those labels or those references or keywords, and yet that also needs to be able to be translated and positioned so that it has that unique value and so on. But like anywhere, I think that's a good data point. It's something to sort of think about and maybe look at your resume to see if that's like everyone else. Remember the days where someone would say, well, tell me about yourself, and the response would be, well, I'm a people person. And, you know, it became meaningless after a while. What do you mean by that is really what's underneath that.
Yeah. And I think that this kind of thing, and it's true, this is another reason why networking is so terribly effective, because if you're investing most of your time and energy in simply responding to job postings, yeah, it's very easy to fall into the buzzword trap, because the thing was, well, I know that resumes get scanned. I know they're looking for specific words. So everybody says great, and so they all have great sections on the resume that are just chock full of these little buzzword phrases and stuff like that. And so everybody starts to do it, and Harriet says, not only does it become meaningless, it becomes an exercise in frustration on the other end. So if you have taken the time to really create a target list of organizations that you have researched, where you begin to understand what their real issues are and the things that are really need attention there, and these aren't necessarily postings at all. These are organizations that you have an interest in for whatever reason you have that interest, and you can then begin to address those things in communications that look a heck of a lot different than an email or a resume that has all this overused kind of verbiage, because you are responding to something very, very specific. Number one, and number two, and as are more important, you are responding to something that is of interest to them. You're not just saying, "Hi, I'm looking for a job," but rather you had the opportunity to there's a reason why why you're making the effort to contact them and help them with issues that are important to them. Let's see if I can read this. It looks like a variety or something like this. The concept is that every resume should be customized to the position. It's easy if you understand the process. If I understand the question here or the statement, one of the nice things about the technology that's available to us today is that you can customize stuff, be it a cover letter or a resume. And again, if you buy the argument that this stuff gets scanned, and so that if you are responding in such a way that is customized to that particular situation, I think it's obvious that there's a much greater opportunity that people are going to see the things that are of interest to them, and therefore have a better opportunity to react to it. So I'm not sure it's necessary to customize everything, but it certainly makes sense to do that to the degree that you can. And with resumes being what they are today, or even cover letters for that matter, it's not that difficult to do. But in order for you to do that, you've got to start with again, this is another area where target companies come into play, so that you have a lot more information and know what to do in terms of trying to customize it to that situation. Harriet, your thoughts on that?
I would agree. I just, you have to have a really solid, I'll call it foundation resume, which really embraces the breadth and depth of your experience along with your differentiators within the target market of where you'd like to land. Once you have that, it makes it a lot easier to leverage the content or tailor the content. When we look at tailoring a cover letter or a resume for any given position, the first step is to take that position posting and map against it your qualifications. And so it's a great exercise, I think, to go through and to understand where you feel that you fit. And that makes it then easier to do that tailoring. And to Dave's point, to do your due diligence, assuming that you know who the company is, on that organization, its business challenges and so on, and think about what you could bring to address that. And that needs to be a part of your cover letter as well. So most individuals don't feel they want to go to that extent or that level for every single thing they see.
Right.
And, you know, that time investment and effort investment becomes part of your overall strategy. But each opportunity needs to be approached independently and think about how important it is, whether it's a good fit, you know, whether you can be networked or introduced directly and so on. And that helps to determine to what extent you want to do that tailoring.
Okay. And here's kind of a little follow-up to the discussion we were having about resumes. This person wanted to know what your thoughts were on a good length of resumes for an executive position. 2 pages, 3 pages? What thoughts would you have on that?
Well, I know we've been talking a lot about the resume, but let me just say that think of it as your portfolio. So not everything has to go into the resume document. You may have other kinds of ways to present yourself that might be utilized as well. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, an executive resume is between 2 to 3 pages. We do know from our research that once it gets beyond 3, it's too long and typically does not get read, unless there's a strategic reason to do so. There are certain times where that does become necessary. I'm thinking like a scientific kind of person or something like that, where you have to have certain details. Mm-hmm. Less than 2 pages, and sometimes even more difficult on 1 page, to present an executive's full value and career is nearly impossible. So again, it has to be the right information and how it's organized and so on, and we always want to weigh being brief and concise against being thorough, appropriately thorough, let me say that.
Yep, I would agree with that. And again, one way to test this is most of us on this call have been on the hiring side of this process many, many times. And so think back to when you were hiring, and even if it was back in the day where you got hard copy dumped on your desk on a Tuesday morning, whatever it was for, and think about how long did you spend going through those responses, whether they had cover letters or whether they didn't or whatever. How long did you spend? And my guess is that most of us would say not very long before we decided whether or not we were going to put it into a pile B, which in fact we might actually spend some time really looking at it more carefully, or if we just said send them a write-off letter or throw it out or whatever we did. I don't think that kind of human inclination has changed a great deal. In fact, I think that, again, given the technology world that we live in, if anything, it's gotten shorter rather than longer. So that's another reason why I would say, certainly absent any other information, 2 to 3 pages is definitely, I think, in the ballpark. A lot of people have trouble with that because they say, well, gee, I've been working for 25 years and so forth, and it's hard to get all of that information on just a couple of pages. That's another reason why, A, I would suggest that you make sure that you ask for the resume review, and B, have a professional deal with this stuff, because they're in the market every day. They have a much better feel for kind of what seems to work and what doesn't, and they are not emotionally invested in every one of those 25 years, and will have a much better, much easier way, I think, of trying to step back and saying, well, okay, Dave, this makes sense to put in. This one maybe we could, you may want to save that for, for an interview or something like that. Anything else you want to add to that, Harriet?
No, I think you just said it. Thank you.
Okay. This person says, I've been a VP and president of a small building supply company for more than 15 years. The market for home building is still kind of flat, and I'm contemplating an industry change. how do I effectively transfer my sales and marketing skills to another industry? I'm glad he asked the question, because this is something that also comes up with some frequency, and that is people who are part of an industry segment that is either still contracting or whatever, and therefore the chances of staying in that segment are going to be very difficult or not particularly high, and they're saying, well, how do I now, after a fair amount of experience in one segment, take those skills and transfer them to another one? Harriet, I'm sure you've had these discussions. What thoughts would you have for somebody in that situation?
Well, now we're back to my three-legged stool analogy, so to speak. But number one is to know yourself well and to know your skill sets and so on, and begin to map those against where you think it may make sense to land. I've worked with executives who, for non-compete sorts of reasons, cannot go to what seems to be the most obvious or the closest match, if you will, to what they've done throughout their career. I'm thinking of one gentleman in particular who spent 26 years with one company. However, the commercial clients that he called upon, that was transferable. He knew those clients and those organizations and was finally able, again, to Dave's point, through a networking connection, land an opportunity in a different industry in terms of products, but they had in common some of the same kinds of customers that they called upon. So his transferability wasn't so much about his product experience, expertise, and so on within the one organization, but rather the transferability of knowledge into the other organization. And he actually worked for a very large company and ended up going to a very small company, really coming more out of sort of post-startup sorts of things and wanting to expand their business. The other point is, initially he was hired as a consultant. So they hired him with a 90-day engagement, I believe it began as, and then got extended a couple of times, to come in and address a very specific need or issue they have, to Dave's point, which in their case was their multi-channel distribution and sales process, which he had a lot of experience around. So to examine it, reorganize it, and so on. About 7-8 months later, they did end up creating a position for him to head up sales and marketing. They really hadn't had that function. So again, know yourself, know your skill sets, think about transferability of skills, what are some creative ways that you can make yourself known, and then utilize your network and look for those business-to-business matches, those unique opportunities. It's going to be more difficult, again, to go through a straight posting if you don't have that experience, if that's one of the requirements.
Yeah, definitely true. Because there's certainly a strong bias of not invented here. One of the first criteria, if we go back to, and in fact we did this for many years, we've run a survey, and one of the questions that we've asked the recruiting community is, what are the key things that your clients really ask you to find? And every single year that we have done that survey, the top 3 things on that list, and they come so close together you could put them in any order you want, were industry-specific experience, functional expertise, and leadership, whatever that means. And there they are. And so you can just imagine the bias that operates in that area. So to Harriet's point, trying to chase something like that through postings is a real mountain to climb. It's you've got to try to do the things that get you in a position. I'm not talking necessarily about interviews, but I'm just talking about gets you into position so that people can begin to see that those skills are obviously transferable, particularly I would say in sales and marketing for sure. Because the things that made you successful at what you did, the skill sets that you brought to whatever that situation is or was, haven't gone anywhere. The problems that businesses face, even though a lot of times they think that industry-specific experience is just so critical, the fact of the matter is that business issues are business issues. And if you've solved a problem in one of those areas where you are, you probably would be equally effective at doing it in a segment that you don't know. A lot of times they think, well, we're very unique and nothing is the same as ours. But I think most people would tell you who changed industry segments that the issues that companies face are not all that dissimilar. A lot of times they think they are, but they're not really. This person says, if you make it through a phone screening, you're invited to a face-to-face interview. You ace it and are invited back for an interview with the president and the senior staff. A week later, you get a perfunctory email thanking you for your time and interest, expressing compliments on your impressive credentials, but advising that the position has been awarded to someone else. Is it natural to conclude age discrimination? What are the telltale signs? Harriet, I've got to believe that you have talked to people who have been in that situation. I certainly know I have as well. What thoughts come to your mind?
Well, I know with age discrimination, it's oftentimes couched in the kinds of questions that you may be asked or the kinds of comments and so on. And so it's hard to conclude from a very generic, it sounds like, letter of decline that they've moved on and pursued other interests. I mean, you certainly can attempt to contact the individual in the company asking for any feedback or insights. Usually they don't give it, but you can always ask. That might be helpful for you moving forward. And then it just depends. I mean, a lot of times companies are required to interview externally based upon their policies and practices, but they really want to promote an internal candidate, or perhaps they even have a preferred candidate in the pipeline that they really would like to pursue, but they need to go through the process. It's interesting. I was fascinated recently by a member I was working with who had been asked to interview at Amazon. Mm-hmm. And she was amazed that, and she's in HR, by the way, an HR exec, she was amazed that part of what they explained to her is, you've gotten through the screen, we're having you prepare this document summary, and you'll come in and you're going to interview with, 5 or 6 people on this day. And within 48 hours, business hours after your interview, we will make a decision and we will let you know. Unlike some companies, when we find a candidate that we feel is a match, we hire them. We don't wait to compare candidate to candidate. So I tell that story only because you have no idea what's going on the other side again. What if someone had a policy like Amazon and, no candidate feedback but immediately make decisions about, in fact, with her, they did decide to pursue another candidate, mm-hmm. And, basically told her. So I guess my caution would be, don't assume that it's because of age discrimination. However, if there were other factors or reasons to come to that conclusion, then, that's a different issue, different story. But what you've described anyway just sounds like a very generic decline letter, and you have no knowledge of who they hired or why without perhaps trying to find out more information.
Yeah, that's very well said. I guess I would just say, first of all, at least based on the question or the way the person has posed it here, is that obviously you don't have enough information to really know. But it seems to me the fact that you were invited back, in particularly a second time, would suggest that it had more to do with their evaluation in the interview process than it did with your age. But you asked about, this person asked about what the telltale signs are. There are a lot of them, but I would say the real telltale signs when it comes to that tend to be more on the order of not getting past phone screens, or hearing back from potential opportunities once they see your graduation dates, or hearing comments like you seem to be overqualified, or seeing postings that say things like not more than 10 years experience, and stuff like that tend to at least for me, tend to raise those those kinds of red flags. But that being said, And I will tell you, for those of you on the call who aren't aware, the average age here in this network is 53. So age discrimination is a subject that is not new to us at all, and unfortunately not to many of our members either. But all that being said, when it comes to a bias, we were talking about industry-specific experience and other potential biases that come up. Age certainly is among those. It's always seemed to me that this kind of stuff operates on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you've got people whose minds you are never going to change. On the other are people whose minds you don't have to worry about changing because they are interested not so much in age as they are somebody who can help them solve a problem. And the rest of us tend to fall somewhere in the middle of all of that, meaning that the biases are probably there for whatever reason, but people are influenceable, and that's an important thing to know. And there are certainly plenty of things that that people can do to try to mitigate the situation. But if you're faced with one where you're dealing with the end of the spectrum where it's just not going to get fixed, it's probably not a company you'd want to work for anyway, and it's time to move on to to other potential opportunities. Harriet, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you've said it. I just I would just reemphasize that I don't know that you would have gotten that far if it had, in fact, age been a factor, unless there's more detail that obviously aren't necessarily appropriate for this call.
Yeah, right. Okay. This person wants to know, should a resume highlight the last 10 or 15 years experience and then just summarize the previous experience? I'm glad this person asked the question. This comes up a fair amount because, people who have been in the working world for 25 or 30 years, and again, we were talking about the length of resumes and so forth, and their different counsel abounds on this subject. So, do I go back 10 or do I do the whole thing, or how do I focus that stuff, Harriet?
It depends on what your target market is and your strategy. I'm thinking of a particular resume in mind where the person's strategy was to land back in a large multinational company. And so in the top portion of her resume, it had to be represented that she'd worked for the likes of PepsiCo and United Technologies in terms of her value proposition and a couple of examples of accomplishments and so on. However, the last 10 years of her career had, or probably a little bit more, I can't recall off the top of my head, was definitely smaller companies, her own consulting business, even a not-for-profit assignment. So it needed to be mentioned, obviously, because reverse chronological history is important, but the comparison of the white space, if you will, that was dedicated to that part of her career versus, now let's go to page 2, middle of the page, starting with PepsiCo and then United Technologies, which was far more expansive, was really important. Why? Because that was the most relevant kind of information given where she wanted to land. So again, you have to balance it. I was talking with a recruiter actually this morning, and we were talking about the need for this candidate to respond to this questionnaire and provide examples of accomplishments. And I asked, I said, well, help me to understand. Do you want most recent examples or most relevant or some combination thereof? And we had this very discussion and decided some combination thereof. You have to say don't include everything beyond 10 years could be a big mistake if, in fact, the relevant experience that you had to what you're targeting occurred, let's say, 12 years ago. So you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot necessarily. You've got to really balance this and think about, again, what's your overall strategy, what's your target market, and then what's the best way to tell your story and unfold your chapters. Sometimes it's less detail, sometimes it's more, but not necessarily leaving it off. Again, now if we're talking 20, 30 years ago, there might be a early career history kind of summary recap, maybe not even with years on it, if that's relevant, or it could be left off. So I'm sorry to say there's no one right answer.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that's very frustrating about this whole process is that so much of the whole interviewing process, if you will, and the kind of biases that we've talked about and so forth, that there's such a broad range of things. A lot of it is subjective, and that certainly is true when it comes to resumes. That the answer is there is no, there is no specific answer, but there certainly are trends or directional things that that can be used and are used depending on the factors that Harriet just mentioned, which makes all kinds of sense, and why it also is very important to have a real plan in mind rather than just sitting back and firing stuff all over the internet, just for the sake of putting stuff out there. It's a lot easier to come up with tactics and strategies if you're talking about something specific, which makes all kinds of sense in terms of how you want to approach it. Harriet, we're kind of coming up on the top of the hour here. In terms of what we've talked about today and things that might have come up recently in terms of the folks that you've talked with and so forth, any particular parting words or something you'd want to share with the group before we have to close?
I would just say that, do take the time to press pause and really think about your personal marketing strategy. Where is it that you're wanting to land? What are you targeting? And then within that context, to then reapproach what you share and how you share it in a very strategic fashion. Everything you know and that you've done throughout your careers on behalf of the products and services that you market or represent or deliver is also very relevant and very true to your own search process. So press that pause button and make sure that you're approaching it strategically.
Very well said indeed. Well, Harriet, thanks very much for being part of this today. I appreciate it as always. Certainly want to thank our audience for their time today, and hope you will join us on other programs like this down the road. We'd be happy to have you. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.